Because I accidentally read the last sentence when I looked ahead. And I'm like, ooh. Consider my interest piqued. Okay, Frank and Maya are getting married. Lovely. For weeks after that, he remained physically clumsy. He also might be having a stroke. Or in love. We'll find out. For weeks after that, he remained physically clumsy, as if he had withdrawn into some other space and had to operate his body from a distance. Teleoperation. It made him aware of how many muscles he had. Sometimes he knew them so well he could snake through the air. But most of the time, he jerked across the landscape like Frankenstein's monster. Burroughs was flooded with bad news. Life in the city seemed fairly normal, but the video screens piped in scenes of a world Frank could scarcely believe. Riots in Hellas. The domed crater New Houston, declaring itself an independent republic. And that same week, Slusinski sent tape of an American orientation in which all 5 dorms had voted to leave for Hellas without the proper travel permits. Gasp. Chalmers contacted the new Unoma factor and got a detachment of UN security police to go there. And 10 men arrested 500. By the simple expedient of overriding and 10 men arrested 500 by the simple expedient of overriding the tent's physical plant computer and ordering the helpless occupants to board a series of train cars before the tent's air was released. They had then been trained off to Korolyov, which was now in effect a prison city. Its transformation into a prison had become general knowledge sometime recently. It was hard to recall exactly when, as it had an air of an already always about it. It was hard to recall exactly when, as it had an air of already always about it. Perhaps because the parts of a prison system had existed for several years, scattered planet-wide. Chalmers interviewed some of the prisoners over their room videos, 2 or 3 at a time. "You see how easy it was to detain you?" he told them. "That's the way it will be all over. The life support systems are so fragile that they're impossible to defend. Even on Earth, advanced military technology makes a police state much more possible to implement than ever before. But here, it's absurdly easy." "Well, you got us when it was easiest," replied a man in his 60s, which was smart. "Once we get free, I'd like to see you catch us. At that point, your life support system is as vulnerable to us as ours is to you. And yours is more visible. You should know better than that. All life support here is hooked back, ultimately to Earth. But they have their number of vast military powers at their disposal, and we don't. You and all your friends are trying to live out a fantasy rebellion. Some kind of sci-fi 1776. Frontiersmen throwing off the yoke of tyranny. But it isn't like that here. The analogies are all wrong, and deceptively wrong, because they mask the reality, the true nature of our dependence and their might. They keep you from seeing that it's fantasy. I'm sure there was many a good Tory neighbor arguing the same case in the colonies, the man said with a grin. Actually, the analogy is in many ways a good one. We're not just cogs in the machine here. We're individual people, most of us ordinary. But there's some real characters, too. We're going to see our Washingtons and Jeffersons and Paines. I guarantee you. Also the Andrew Jacksons and Forrest Mosbys. The brutal men who are good at getting what they want. This is ridiculous, Frank cried. It's a false analogy. Well, it's more a metaphor than an analogy anyway. There are differences, but we intend to respond to those creatively. We won't be hefting muskets over rock walls to take pot shots at you. Hefting miner lasers over crater walls? You think that's different? The man flicked at him, as if the camera in his room were a mosquito. I suppose the real question is, will we have a Lincoln? Lincoln is dead, Frank snapped. And historical analogy is the last refuge of people who can't grasp the current situation. He cut the connection. Reason was useless. Also anger. Also sarcasm. Not to mention irony. He could only try to match them in Fantasyland. So he stood up in meetings, and he did his very best, haranguing them about what Mars was, how it had come to be, what fine future it would have as a collective society, specifically and organically Martian in its nature. With the dross of all those Terran hatreds burned away. All those dead habits that kept us from really living. From the creation that is the world's only real beauty, damn it. Useless. He tried to arrange meetings with some of the disappeared, and once he talked with a group by phone and asked them to pass the word along to Hiroko if possible, that he urgently needed to talk to her. But no one seemed to know where she was. Then, one day, he got a message from her, in print, faxed down from Phobos. He'd be better off talking to Arcady, it said. He'd be better off talking to Arcady, it said. But Arcady had disappeared while down in Hellas and was no longer taking calls. It's like playing fucking hide and seek, Frank exclaimed bitterly to Maya one day. Did you have that game in Russia? I remember playing with some older kids one time. It was around sunset, and a storm over the water made it really dark. And there I was, wandering around empty streets, knowing I'd never find any of them. Forget the disappeared, she advised. Concentrate on who you can see. The disappeared will be monitoring you anyway. It doesn't matter if you can't see them or if they don't reply. He shook his head. Then there was a new wave of emigration. He shouted for Slusinski and ordered him to get an explanation from Washington. Apparently, sir, the elevator consortium has been bought in a hostile takeover by Subarashi, so its assets are in Trinidad Tobago, and it is no longer interested in responding to American concerns about the matter. Infrastructure construction capability is now in line with a moderate emigration rate, they say. Infrastructure construction capability is now in line with a moderate emigration rate, they say. Damn them, Frank said. They don't know what they're doing with this. He walked in a circle, grinding his teeth. The words spilled quietly out of him, in a monologue of their own making. You see, but you don't understand. It's like John used to say. There's parts of Martian reality that don't make it across the vacuum. Not just the feel of the gravity, but the feel of getting up in a dorm and going down to the baths and then across the alley to a dining hall. And so you're getting it all wrong, you arrogant, ignorant, stupid sons of bitches. He and Maya took the train from Burroughs back up to Pavonis Mons. I'll be dancing after book club. He and Maya took the train from Burroughs back up to Pavonis Mons. All during the trip, he sat by the window and watched the red landscape rise and fall, contract into the flatland 5 kilometers, and then, as they rose, extend out to 40 kilometers, or 100. Such a big bulge in the planet. Tharsis. Something inside, breaking out, as in the current situation. Yes, they were stuck on the side of the Tharsis bulge of Martian history, with the big volcanoes about to pop. And then there one was. Pavonis Mons. An enormous dream mountain, as if the world were a print by Hokusai. Frank found it difficult to talk. He avoided looking at the TV at the front of the car. News flashed up and down the train almost instantly anyway, in snatches of overheard conversation or the looks on people's faces. It was never necessary to watch the video to find out the really important news. The train ran through a forest of Acheron pines, tiny things with bark like black iron, and cylindrical bushes of needles. But the needles were all yellow and drooping. He had heard about this. There was some kind of problem with the soil. Too much salt or too little nitrogen. They weren't sure. Helmeted figures stood around one on a ladder, plucking specimens of the sick needles. That's me, Frank said to Maya under his breath as she was asleep. Playing with needles when the roots are sick. In the Sheffield offices, he started meeting with the new elevator administrators. At the same time, beginning another round of simultaneous meetings in Washington. It turned out Phyllis was still in control of the elevator, having aided Subarashi in the hostile takeover. Then they heard that Arkady was in Nicosia, just down the slope from Pavonis, and that he and his followers had declared Nicosia a free city like New Houston. Nicosia had become a big jump-off point for the disappeared. You could slip into Nicosia and never be heard of again. It had happened hundreds of times, so many that it was clear there was some system there of contact and transmission, an underground railroad kind of thing that no undercover agent had been able to penetrate, or at least return from. "Let's go down there and talk to him," Frank said to Maya when he heard. "I really want to confront him in person." "It won't do any good," Maya said darkly. But Nadia was supposed to be there, so she came along. All down the slope of Tharsis, they rode in silence, watching the frosted rock fly by. Wonder what an elevator would look like. They described it as like a thread of fishing line, as if you were in the ocean and you're a fish. It's like a fishing line going up into the sky until it disappears beyond, like, you know how things disappear when they get too high up. So yeah, like a thread suspended in the air. And then you get up close and it's actually about the size of, I think, maybe this room. It's actually like about the length and width of this room or something. Something like that. But from pretty much all distance, it looks like a big thread going up in the sky. The cable would be so heavy, even by the time it reached 0G, there's no way it's just hanging from space, but this isn't real. Yeah, they have an asteroid is being used as a ballast. So there's an asteroid in orbit that's where they put a factory that automatically spit out the elevator. Like, it assembled the elevator and spit it out to put it simply. And that asteroid is holding the thread over a fixed point on the planet. It's not attached to the planet. It's hovering over the planet in orbit through that asteroid. But this isn't real, but it makes that more, it's not just an elevator in space. It's like there's a whole mechanism they explain. And it's very slowly vibrating. And if you don't buy that, a wizard did it. Yeah, exactly. And they have a space station on the asteroid so that all of the materials and or people can, get a nice rest before they get blasted back to Earth in 0G. So the whole point of doing that was to enable the transport of goods and people, not goods, but like raw material more likely. Also goods down to the planet and raw material up from the planet and people back and forth. And the whole point of that was that if you didn't have a space elevator, you'd literally have to use rockets to shoot people out of the planet, fighting gravity both ways. So the space elevator really opened up the Martian economy and kept it competitive. Because once you're on the asteroid, then you can just take off using like a fraction of the fuel. Mars would have been better off without it. But that remains to be seen, I guess. Shareholder value, though, went through the roof. Through the atmosphere, you could say. I really want to confront Arcady in person. It won't do any good, Maya said darkly, but Nadia was supposed to be there as well, so she came along. All down the slope of Tharsis they rode in silence, watching the frosted rock fly by. At Nicosia, the station opened for their train, as if there was not even a question of refusing them. But Arcady and Nadia were not in the small crowd that greeted them. Instead, it was Alexander Zalen and Raoul. Back at the city manager's offices, they called up Arcady on a vid link. Judging by the sunlight behind him, he was already many kilometers to the east. And Nadia, they said, had never been in Nicosia at all. Arcady looked the same as ever, expansive and relaxed. "This is madness," Frank said to him, furious that he had not gotten him in person. "You can't hope to succeed." "But we can," Arcady said. "We do." His luxuriant red and white beard was an obvious revolutionary badge, as if he were a young Fidel about to enter Havana. "Of course, it would be easier with your help, Frank. Think about it." Then, before Frank could say more, someone off-screen got Arcady's attention. A muttered conversation in Russian, and then Arcady faced him again. "Sorry, Frank. I must attend to something. I'll get back to you as soon as possible." "Don't you go," Frank shouted, but the connection was gone. "God damn it!" Nadia came on the line. She was in Burroughs, but had been linked into the exchange, such as it was. In contrast to Arcady, she was taut, brusque, unhappy. "You can't support what he's doing," Frank cried. "No," Nadia said grimly. "We aren't talking. We still have this phone contact, which is how I knew where you were, but we don't use it direct anymore. No point." "You can't influence him?" Maya said. "No." Frank could see that this was hard for Maya to believe, and it almost made him laugh. Not influence a man? Not manipulate him? What was Nadia's problem? That night, they stayed at a dorm near the station. It was a party line. That night, they stayed at a dorm near the station. After supper, Maya went back to the city manager's office to talk to Alexander and Dmitri and Elena and Raoul. Frank wasn't interested. It was a waste of time. Restlessly, he walked through the circumference of the old town, through alleys running against the tent wall, remembering that night so long ago. Only 9 years, in fact, but it felt like 100. Nicosia looked so little these days. Nicosia looked little these days. The park at the western apex still had a good view of the whole. but a blackness filled things so that he could scarcely see. In the sycamore grove, now mature, he passed a short man hurrying the other way. The man stopped and stared at Frank, who was under a street lamp. "Chalmers!" the man exclaimed. Frank turned. The man had a thin face, long tangled dreadlocks, dark skin. No one he knew. But seeing him, he felt a chill. "Yes?" he snapped. The man regarded him. He said, "You don't know me, do you?" "No, I don't. Who are you?" The man's grin was asymmetrical, as if his face had been cracked at the point of the jaw. Underneath the streetlight, it looked warped, half crazed. "Who are you?" Frank said again. The man raised a finger. "The last time we met, you were bringing down the town. Tonight it's my turn, ha!" He strode off laughing, each sharp ha higher than the last. "Tonight it's my turn, ha ha ha!" Back at the city manager's, Maya clutched his arm. "I was worried. You shouldn't be walking around alone in this town." "Shut up." Jesus. Frank, shut up. He went to a phone and called the physical plant. Everything was normal. He called the Unoma police and told them to mount an armed guard at the plant and the train station. He was still repeating the order to someone higher up the chain of command, and it seemed likely it would go all the way up to the new factor for confirmation, for final confirmation, when the screen went blank. There was a tremor underfoot, and every alarm bell in the town went off at once. A concerted, adrenal, bring! Then there was a sharp jolt. The doors all hissed shut. The building was sealing, meaning pressures outside had made a rapid drop. He and Maya ran to the window and looked out. The tent over Nicosia was down. The tent over Nicosia was down. In some places stretched over the tallest rooftops, like saran wrap. In others blowing away on the wind. In others blowing away on the wind. They popped the tent. People down on the street were pounding on doors. Running, collapsing. Huddled in on themselves like the bodies in Pompeii. Frank wheeled away, his teeth bursting with hot pain. Apparently, the building had sealed itself successfully. Below all the noise, Frank could hear or feel the hum of a generator. The video screens were blank, which had the effect of making it hard to believe the view out the window. Maya's face was pink, but her manner calm. "The tent is down." "I know. But what happened?" He didn't reply. She was working away at the video screens. "Have you tried the radio yet?" "No." Well, she cried, exasperated by his silence. Do you know what's going on? Revolution, he said. The end of part 6. Next, Monday, will be part 7, Senzani Na. Thank you for listening, y'all.